Welcome back to Decentralounge, brought to you by GlobalStake, your truly decentralized SOC 2 Type 2 certified institutional bare metal blockchain infrastructure provider. I'm your host, Ryan Hazinski, head of protocol partnerships, along with my co-host Wyatt Clancy, our VP of growth. Today, we're joined by Austin Federa, co-founder of DoubleZero Foundation. Austin has been deeply involved in the crypto ecosystem for years, with experience spanning product, marketing, communications, and ecosystem strategy across some of the industry's most recognizable organizations. Before launching DoubleZero, he spent several years working across the Solana ecosystem, including roles at Solana Foundation and Solana Labs, where he served as head of strategy and previously head of communications, helping guide ecosystem growth during a pivotal period for the network. Earlier in his career, Austin also worked at Bison Trails, now part of Coinbase, as well as Republic Crypto, gaining experience across infrastructure, venture, and the broader digital asset landscape. Today, Austin is focused on building DoubleZero, a project aiming to rethink how the physical internet infrastructure behind blockchains operate. DoubleZero is working to create a dedicated fiber network designed specifically for high-performance distributed systems, helping blockchain networks achieve lower latency, better reliability, and greater scalability as the industry continues to grow. Today, we'll talk about Austin's journey into crypto, what he learned from his time scaling one of the fastest growing ecosystems in the industry, and why he believes the next frontier for blockchain innovation may actually lie in the physical networking layer that powers it. Austin, so excited to have you here today. Welcome to Decentralounge. Why don't we just start off with your journey and how you got involved in this crazy world of crypto?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for having me. So, how did I get involved in this? I mean, it depends how far back you want to go. I had the origin story, similar to many people, of getting rugged on Mount Gox back in the 2010s. But then really got back into the industry in, I think, like mid 2017. I'd moved to New York for a job with a fintech company that was turned out rapidly in the process of failing. But their last effort was to try and pivot and build a borrow lend token on Ethereum. And the project never launched, didn't go anywhere. They ended up pivoting to something much more institutional. But that got me really hooked on the concept of programmable blockchains as opposed to just value transfer blockchains like Bitcoin, and just have been working in the industry ever since.
Very cool. Well, then I guess let's speak. You spent a lot of time with Solana, and this is obviously has become sort of a major success story, right? We always used to just think of Bitcoin and ETH as being sort of the one-two punch, and then Solana has arguably become sort of the one that falls immediately after Ethereum for that programmable chain. And what led you to that? You were there pretty early, and sort of explain sort of your journey and how you helped shape Solana into what it is today.
Yeah, so I was interviewing with them right around the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, as Bison Trails was getting acquired by Coinbase. And Coinbase is a great company, but it just didn't feel like the right place for me to go. And candidly, when I was initially talking with them, I didn't want the job. I had offers from a lot of other folks, but a guy I know, Ben Sparango, said, "Hey, you should talk to these guys. Like, I just joined the company at Solana Labs. They're doing really interesting stuff." And for me, it was really talking with Toly back in the early days of when the network had just launched, and hearing his vision for one global state machine and a blockchain that could move as fast as NASDAQ markets do. And the idea that, maybe sharding wasn't the only way to scale a blockchain, and you could build a faster global environment that would have all these types of advantages that the existing Ethereum L1 architecture had, but just at 10,000 times the speed. And, Solana's not there yet. It's not 10,000 times the speed of the Ethereum L1, but it's 1,000 times the speed of the Ethereum L1. And so that's been a pretty interesting thing to see. And for me, it was just, I'd love to say I was prescient and said this will be $100 billion global asset someday. But really what it was is like, this is a smart group of people and I will learn a ton working for them. And that was very much correct.
Seems like that's always the edge in this industry, right? Like surrounding yourself by people who are much smarter than you. Like I'm a former high school teacher, right? Like it's sometimes people that tell the story and it's like, why did you get involved? And it's just like I felt like it was scratching sort of that nerdy itch of these people are way smarter. I know nothing about this stuff and I will grow immensely just from having been exposed to it. So
Yes.
really interesting way to look at it. And it seems like that's a common thread throughout so many conversations that we've had here on Decentralounge. So, I mean, then was part of what you were building at Solana, then did that translate over to DoubleZero? Because what you're building seems like you kind of almost had that in mind and there's other systems. So I guess let's start to unpack DoubleZero. what the vision is there, and why you guys started building it the way that you have.
Yeah, so the whole point of the DoubleZero network is to allow blockchains to move as fast as traditional financial systems run. And we can kind of be like very glib about this in crypto to be like, oh, JP Morgan and NASDAQ have nothing on us. Like we have these global permissionless systems. And all that is true. Like there is real, incredible product and market innovation happening on blockchain. But the time scales that crypto operates and the volume transfers and all these things, they still pale in comparison to what crypto calls traditional finance and the rest of the world just calls finance. And there's a reason they just call it finance, is it is the dominant player today by orders of magnitude. And so the whole idea of DoubleZero was, could we build something on the same technology stack that finance operates on, which are private fiber networks and these systems that move much faster than the public internet, but do it in a way that's compatible with the ethos and vision and philosophy of blockchain, which is to have multiple independent contributors, to have checks and balances and censorship resistance and all of these types of things on top of a network that can support any type of high performance system, whether that is Solana or Hyperliquid or an L2 or a non-blockchain system entirely that just wants the same type of global presence for finance that the traditional financial market has. At the same time, when you look at what happens in like the existing financial system, it is governed by gatekeepers and access protocols. And most of that is side deals or sort of, proprietary systems. DoubleZero is the first high performance fiber network in the world run by multiple independent contributors. And also it's the first permissionless high performance fiber network in the world. If you are a Solana validator, you can just join the DoubleZero network. It's because everything is powered by code and cryptography and blockchain. We just read what's going on the Solana network and say any validator is able to join and connect in and get access to this much faster connectivity layer than they would normally get. And so, Solana was sort of the first blockchain that could use something like DoubleZero. Historically, blockchains have been fast compared to previous blockchains, but quite slow compared to Web 2 systems. And so, even Solana at its like blazing fast 400 millisecond block times is incredibly slow relative to existing financial systems, not payment systems, but trading systems. And so this is kind of where the vision of DoubleZero came from. Can we give the industry the tools over the course of 2 years to accelerate by a decade or more by simply making the fundamental low-level infrastructure they operate on much faster and much more performant?
Certainly an ambitious vision, and something that you guys have obviously already been executing on quite expertly. And tell us a little bit more about, it is not random. Where you look at DoubleZero and where you guys are placing nodes, it's very strategic in terms of the kind of checkpoints across the world that you're building this incredibly decentralized system. So maybe walk us through a little bit about the decision-making tree for how you choose where to place sort of these hubs for
Yeah.
DoubleZero, because this is kind of bringing it all together and tying it together.
So the secret and the beauty is we don't choose. This is a network operated by independent contributors. And so DoubleZero Foundation and Malbec Labs, we run 0 fiber links in the network. The entire network is contributed by 15 different network contributors. And so they are choosing where to build connectivity out to, where to bridge connectivity into. And that is an expressed preference that is based on basically where customers are, where Solana validators and RPCs and trade servers and these types of things run today. So if you map sort of a stake map of the world and the DoubleZero connectivity map, you'll see there's a lot of overlap there, and that's intentional. It's because capitalism is really good at one thing: bringing goods and services to willing customers. And so we actually get a much more efficiently planned and routed network by us not planning or routing the network, but instead the network contributors just simply saying the classic age-old question that people have been asking themselves for hundreds of years: where can I make the most money? And because we align incentives, where can I make the most money becomes where can I provide the most valuable service to validators and RPCs.
Really interesting, and I had obviously no clue that that's how it was architected. And it's Also interesting to think of it as an emergent property of the system itself, right? Where it's just this kind of organic thing that came about based on sort of these incentives. So very, very fascinating. Now, obviously, you started with Solana, and this is sort of the one thing, but I know here at GlobalStake, we do a lot with decentralized storage, and we've been very excitedly talking to Pranav and Samir from Aptos and Jump Capital about Shelby. And I know
Yes.
that we saw each other very briefly at the Aptos experience, where that was sort of the big kind of presentation about how Shelby is working with DoubleZero to help provide sort of this direct attack on the S3 market for decentralized storage. And maybe let's talk a little bit about how DoubleZero makes that possible.
Yeah, definitely. So Shelby is this new storage protocol built by the folks at Aptos and with help some of the folks at Jump as well. And their whole idea here is that there is a market for hot storage. We've had decentralized, basically glacial storage for a while, long-term archival storage. That's IPFS and Filecoin and Arweave and those folks. But hot storage, data that's meant to be read a lot of times or very quickly, is something blockchain has historically not really had much of a ability to serve a market for. And so their whole thesis here is like, hey, we can build hot storage systems on an architecture that's quite competitive with S3, but we can't do that on the public internet. And there's a really interesting question as to why. And a lot of it has to do with bandwidth billing costs and the way that cloud providers and data centers actually charge, which is if you look at the bill, AWS bill, a GCP bill, an Azure bill, an Alibaba bill, a Tencent bill from their cloud providers, for a large enterprise, bandwidth tends to be the highest cost. And there's a reason for that. Like if you're Google, the last thing you want is someone using AWS for a database service. You want them to be fully integrated, fully vertical stack. And so the DoubleZero network breaks the economic structure down in a very different way. And it makes it possible for these types of systems to actually all interoperate in multiple independent data centers, as well as then having direct access cloud connectors into some cloud data centers as well. And so the economics of Shelby, both the ability for it to respond really quickly to requests that are coming in, and then all the sort of background work it has to do of just challenging different nodes to say, hey, you said Austin's data is still there. Is it there? And if you don't respond quickly enough, you're going to get penalized. It's those sorts of little, like, almost like background maintenance tasks that were just going to break the economics of Shelby if that had to be subject to bandwidth egress charges. So with DoubleZero, it's kind of brilliant for us because DoubleZero runs on like dedicated bandwidth capacity. So if you're contributing a link to DoubleZero, you're contributing what's known as a wavelength on a piece of fiber. So it's not a packet switching service like you get from your ISP. You're actually getting like dedicated carved out bandwidth at like the optical level. And so that wavelength service, whether it's used 1% or 85%, it's still just as expensive to contribute to the DoubleZero network. And so the beauty of this is we can support these kind of low-level background style checksum things like Shelby is doing without it being a big drain or drag on the network, and do it at a cost that's disruptively low compared to what they would get. At the same time, when there's like a customer request coming in, like let's say someone's like got a petabyte of data that's a SQL set or AI training data or something like that sitting on one of these nodes, and they want that data as quickly as possible. Well, there's going to be a much higher cost for that. But in that model, there's obviously a paying customer at the end of that. And so there's a commercial relationship with Shelby that makes the whole thing work. But the major unlock here was DoubleZero does not need to bill all bandwidth in the same way. And we don't even really bill for bandwidth, right? That's sort of it's different classes of service. And so because of that structure here, because it's a fundamentally different type of network than a packet switching network, we're able to just innovate on the business model, which is also powered by tokens.
Great. Yeah, I was going to build off of that. You actually answered my initial question about economic incentives and so forth. But my curiosity now would be zooming out 10 years, 5 years. How do you think that economic incentive structure will shift over time, and how do you think it might reach maturity?
Yeah, so I think we can learn a lot from the compute cloud providers when we look at kind of the future of how these systems could play out. So the compute cloud providers basically carved out this interesting market initially, which is people who can't afford to run their own data centers. And so it was early adopters by startups or others that sort of have that type of relationship. And as things moved on, like a friend of mine, his first job when he joined Etsy was to move them out of their data center in New Jersey into AWS. And his last job before he left Etsy about 5 years later was to move them out of AWS and back into the same data center in New Jersey, because the economics of scale and where those lines intersect always change depending on the economics of the system. And so, for us, one of the things we're really trying to do is do for connectivity the same type of thing that the cloud did for compute. So there is no real on-demand connectivity. You think you could just go to a website and like press a few buttons and get a custom configured global network, the same way you can press a few buttons and get a custom configured global compute network. But there isn't today. And so this was like a really important breakthrough of us, is to say we can have this same level of highly programmable software, basically defined networking with the advantages of a hardware powered network. I think that's kind of what it looks like over the long term, is like telecom is rough today, right? It's not a particularly high margin business for the most part on the carrier side of things. A lot of them are owned by PE firms, and they're on incredible cost optimization. That's like the biggest trend among all this stuff, is like the public internet is not as performant as it could be because the economic incentives don't exist there. And so our whole system is like, there's this big gap, right, between you use the public internet or you're like Citadel and Jump and like OpenAI, you build your own network. And there's this huge middle market in between that would benefit from higher performance systems, but they don't have $50 million a year to spend on OpEx for running and maintaining a global fiber network.
What you touched on just there is very reminiscent to one of our co-founders, Rich Shorten, who came from Wall Street background, M&A lawyer, but then was very involved in the telecom space and sort of the deregulatory period in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the reason GlobalStake is built the way that it is, by owning the network stack, the hardware layer, all of it, because of seeing the challenges of running on hyperscaler. But more importantly, he's always believed that the same thing that you just alluded to is going to happen, where when I was a kid, you'd have to call somebody long distance. It was literally $1 a minute, and that trends to zero over time. And so, knowing that this is going to probably happen in our industry, how does that leave DoubleZero poised, to capture some more of that value with having this dedicated fiber network that is being put all over the globe?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept here is that the value stack is currently quite broken. So the beautiful thing about what we're able to do is this is a network effect business, and private networking, ironically, is an anti-network effect business. If you look at sort of everything throughout the traditional private networking world, it's all unit cost economic based. Because if I sell, private capacity to you, you're either getting packet switch service, which is not really the performance that most people are asking for, or you're getting dedicated wave service, which at that point, again, it's the same cost whether I'm using 1% of it or 99% of it. And so the major innovation I think we have is this ability to have this be a cost sharing network and an upside sharing network. That's kind of the two major components that go into this, is that, if I'm a new contributor and I bring connectivity to a market that was not previously served, that's great for me. I've got this extension line that I'm earning rewards on, but the person who has the backhaul line that transfers that data all the way across oceans to another continent, they're now also able to serve another market, which is the people you just connected, right? And that's kind of the beauty about this, is a lot of the way that these businesses have historically ran is anti-network effect businesses. Which is part of one of the fundamental problems that like the space has been stuck in for a while. And so the beauty of this is we have a reward mechanism that's based on the usefulness of connectivity, not any sort of vanity metrics about that connectivity. So this is a proof, the model is called proof of utility, and it's kind of modeled after Bitcoin's proof of work, in that if you are providing, let's say, 10% of the value to a network, you should get 10% of the rewards, irrespective of how many DoubleZero tokens you already own. This is the same way Bitcoin works. So I provide 10% of the hash power, I get 10% of the rewards, which is very different than a proof of stake protocol. Now they're trying to do different things. Obviously, proof of stake has to secure the state of the protocol, so it's trying to accomplish a very different task. But because this is a stateless protocol, we don't need that sort of economic inefficiency in the design structure. And so instead, what this incentivizes is it incentivizes various different fiber providers to be in competition with one another. We want them saying, hey, this route's really popular and really valuable. If I can get 5 milliseconds more performance out of this route, I'm going to steal some of those rewards. And so we'll sort of get this like this beautiful weaponization of capitalism to produce positive sum outcomes for everyone using the network.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, thank you for the explanation. This has been really enlightening because I've admittedly not done a deep dive into DoubleZero, even though I understood like on the surface level, like what it is that you guys are building. So
yeah, it's been
Austin. Oh, sorry, I just, to cut you off there, but I want to let you know we were bumping up against the time. So as you finish your final thought, one thing, if you could cap it off as well, is if you could let people know where they can learn more, where they can follow along with updates on the program and everything. That'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. DoubleZero.xyz and DoubleZero.xyz/dashboard. That'll show you the whole network in real time. You can click on each link. You can look at its performance. You can see who's contributing it. And then, yeah, if folks are interested in getting in touch, if you run a Solana validator or RPC, you can just go ahead and connect those today. And then if you work for another protocol and you're interested in exploring how DoubleZero could potentially help accelerate your system, we would love to talk. And if you're a bare metal operator looking to get DoubleZero fiber in your data centers where you operate, we'd love to chat as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this quick overview podcast with us today, Austin. Really appreciate it. For those who are watching or tuning in to Decentralounge, whether audio or video, thank you for listening to today's or watching today's episode. This has been a great conversation with Austin Federa, DoubleZero. So we'll tune in next time on the next Decentralounge. And until then, take care, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.